Okay, guys, we're ready to get started. Get everybody's attention, please. Thanks for being here tonight. We have a lot to cover. There's a lot of handouts in your book. Please take them with you. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Peter Cole. If you don't know Peter, you will in a couple seconds.
So, yeah, for those who I have not met, welcome to MAACA. I'm Peter Cole. I'm President and Chief Operating Officer here at MAACA. And as you see, we have a wonderful training facility that we can do all kinds of things. If you know somebody who wants to teach underwater basket weaving, have them call us. We're happy to host them for a training event. But it's our pleasure to be here. Welcome to Josh, Lester, the folks from Dorman. Hope you guys have a great class. As I mentioned to them, I'm going to leave you in Steve's good hands and Ron's good hands, and I'm going to jump in my little Baja, and I'm going to make my way back out to Lancaster County to go home for the evening. So thanks for coming and appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for letting us be here. Appreciate it. So before we get started, has anybody or has everybody really learned about the vehicle service professional? Jared's shaking his head. The vehicle service, the NASTA lockout information? No, don't know about it. Okay, so did you hear something about it? Okay, we're only going to touch on it. We're going to try and do it Zoom on it. But if you need to figure it out and try and find out how you can find out if you're good standing in Pennsylvania, it's on this handout for you when you go to sign up for it. But Josh will talk a little bit about it when we turn it over to Josh. But for now, we're going to turn it over to Lester Kovac from Dorman.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? You want me to use this, Steve, or can I? Oh, for the tape. Okay. All right. I see some familiar faces here. My name's Lester Kovacs. I work for Dorman Products. I'm going to keep my part really short because the reason why you're all here is not to listen to me. It's to listen to that guy over there on advanced drivability. I just wanted to, thank Max for allowing us to be here, and also Ron and the team. One of the things that technician training is new to Dorman. We went down this path in roughly towards the end of 2019. This has nothing to do with selling our products. Hope and give us feedback if it does. This is totally separate from Dorman Products. This is not a profit center for us. This is for us the future of the industry, and the shortage of techs is real. And we have to make sure that we have the next generation ready to work on these vehicles. When you think about all the different trades out there, I have friends that are electricians and plumbers, and it's not a knock. They make a really good living, but nothing's really changed with what they're doing today, right? When you think about old electricity in houses, it's knob and tube plumbing. It hasn't changed a lot. But look at these vehicles, especially the last 3 or 4 years, with ADAS and all these complex modules, 6 high-speed networks on these vehicles. And there's a lot of opportunities to the perception of the technician before, and even some of the kids coming out of schools, is that this is a dirty, grimy industry. But the reality is there's a lot of opportunity, and you all in this room are diagnosticians and technicians. So Dorman realizes that. This is our 4th year training. We have 4 full-time trainers, and we're really excited about the program. We're going to continue to grow it. Again, all focusing on not promoting our products. I had a piece that I was supposed to present, but I'm going to skip it because to me, this is the most important part. I am going to leave my business cards and our latest guide that goes over some of the new products that we have here. And more importantly, the only thing I'll say about our products, if you've had any challenges or have any feedbacks about existing products or anything else, feel free to reach out to me. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh. Thank you.
Josh did some training for us up in Easton, and he had a really unique way of doing a 3-part verification when he did repairs before and after, and I liked it. Yeah. So Josh is here. Josh, great guy. So thank you. There you go, Josh.
How's everyone doing tonight? Good? Good. Good? Full stomach? Give everyone from Ron to Max to Lester a round of applause. It takes a lot to make this happen. You don't realize how much it takes to make this happen, from the phone calls to setting a place up to getting the food here, and they do it all for the bettering the industry. So big hats off to them. Thank you for everyone that did that. I know you guys worked all day, so I appreciate you coming out. I was a full-time employee up until last year with a garage running a 6-bay body shop and a 6-bay repair shop. So I know what it's like. And now with a 1-year-old at home, I know how hard it is to get the spare time to be here tonight. So I appreciate that. So we're going to do advanced drivability tonight. Everybody's seeing drivability, right? It's not going away. So I want to get you in a mindset. How does a PCM know that a car is misfiring? Just shout it out. Crank sensor? Yep. And what do they do with that crank sensor? They watch the variation of speeding up and slowing down. So in order for it to count that misfire, there has to be deviation between cylinder to cylinder, right? Think about on a 6-cylinder engine, how crucial every key element is to making sure that all 6 cylinders are at the exact same speed. 600 RPM, right? 600 rotations per minute, 60 seconds. How fast is that going? Right? So I don't like to think of misfires as misfires. We call them misfires because a computer programmer said it was a misfire. If you ask number one question you get when you ask somebody what causes a misfire, they're going to tell you a spark plug. I don't know if the word fire and spark go hand in hand, but think about complete combustion. What do we need for complete combustion? Yeah. We need the proper amount of fuel, the right amount of fuel. We need that fuel to atomize, right? Then we need the correct amount of air. We need to be able to squeeze that properly. And then we need to fire the spark plug. Not only do we need to fire that spark plug, we need to fire it at the right time, and we need to do it correctly, correct? We'll all agree. So would we all agree that a misfire is an incomplete combustion, right? So we think about a misfire as it's air, fuel, or spark, but it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Anything that is going to slow down the crankshaft is going to be considered a misfire. I think we can all agree. So if we miss any one of those key elements, is that one cylinder not going to fire at the same speed as the other cylinders? There's a lot of chemistry, a lot of mechanical, a lot of stuff that goes involved with making sure that the car fires at the same speed every time, correct? That's where we're really at. You know, it takes a lot to do that. So what I'm going to do tonight is not everything fails in one way, right? How many of you had 2-cylinder misfire? One was a spark plug, but one was a dead cylinder on the other side for a mechanical issue, right? Not all parts fail the same way. Not all things fail the same way. If one test is good, 2 tests got to be better, right? If 2 tests are better, 3 tests got to be great, right? How many times have you done one test, something failed, another test it passed? I can't have Goldilocks diagnostics. Anyone know what Goldilocks diagnostics is? Right? This pudding's too saggy. This pudding's too tough. This chair doesn't work. So we can't have a diagnostic process that works for this chair, but it doesn't work for that chair. Would we all agree? We need a generic testing that's going to work over a wide range of vehicles. And that's what we're going to cover tonight. So this webinar is technically a 3 to 4.5 hour webinar. I'm going to squeeze a lot of stuff in tonight. There are going to be some stuff that I'm going to speed through because I think we're all intelligent people and it's really at a lower level. I'm just going to mention on them. All the slides are numbered down here in the corner. 4. Does everybody have a pen to write with? Take notes. Please feel free to ask any questions at any time. It would be dumb not to ask a question. You're spending your time here tonight with me. So you should get the information you need. So what we're going to cover is, anybody here, I should see everyone's hand go up. Everybody have a functional scan tool in their shop? Anybody using OEM scan tools? What's the OEM scan tool you're using? DRB, okay, it's a factory scan tool. You ever been burned by it yet? Yep, okay. So we're gonna cover different scan. Anyone doing 5-gas, using a 5-gas analyzer? You feel pretty comfortable with it? Okay. So there's only one guy in the room that's okay with 5-gas, that's using it. That's gonna be one of the parts I probably just blow over if you're okay. There's only one guy doing 5-gas. Anybody using a lab scope and an amp clamp? You really need to get into using a lab scope. The stuff that's coming at us, a scan tool is not quick enough. the more anyone realized that the more PIDs you pick, the slower the scan tool gets, right? You ever notice that's why when GM goes in and you see engine 1, and then there's engine 2, and then there's evap, those are just a small amount of PIDs that they need to get that information, because there's what we call an update rate on scan tools. Anybody familiar with CAN bus in the room? How does a module get on the bus over everybody else? If everybody had a question, raise their hand right now. I had to pick one person. How does that CAN bus get a message across? They do what they call is they fight for arbitration. Whoever is more important gets the bus. Your scan tool is the least priority. It does not care. The car does not care about your scan tool. That's why there's refresh rates. So it has to say, I want RPM, get an answer. I want crankshaft position sensor, and so on. And it has to fight for the bus. So when you're in scan tool data and you're doing drivability, make sure you're only picking the PIDs that you need. So tonight we're going to cover coming up with the game plan. We're going to talk about advanced lab scopes. We're going to talk about fuel trims, computer controls, no-start diagnostics, some variable valve timing stuff. Anyone doing in-cylinder pressure transducers? Okay. We can do some in-cylinder pressure transducing stuff. So we're going to cover a lot. You got to come up with a game plan. So however you got, and this is where this 8-step diagnostic problem part comes in, you have to verify the customer's concern. You cannot not verify the customer's concern, right? Because the last thing you want to do is have your advisor, and don't beat me up on this, I know how this goes, I know what everyone's going to say, but you need to get the correct information before you go out to the car. You need to get the right information because the car stalls. Well, when does the car stall? I could be sitting driving around light to light all day long waiting for that car to stall. No, it's only wide open throttle pulling a hill. Well, that's a whole different diagnostics, right? So you have to know when you need to be and where you need to be for that problem. Always want to do a visual inspection. Pop the hood. Are the battery terminals corroded? Is it oxygen sensor wire broke, right? Is the air boot duct? Because if I go in with the scan tool and I have a 171, well, I'm not diagnosing around the broken air duct. That's a whole nother problem. I got to start with that. So always do a visual inspection. You get in the car and it's squish, squish, squish. Well, if I start pulling codes and I have a bunch of U codes, I'll put that in the back of my head that I just stepped into a puddle of water. Want to use generic scan tool data as much as you can, and we're going to get there. Always want to verify the repair. Somehow, when you're on your road test, we're going to do what we call the triple Ds, and not the triple Ds that you're thinking of. We're going to do diagnostic-driven data. So you're going to collect information. Don't have a road test looking at the scan tool. Have someone drive with you or record it. Verify your problem, collect the data, and it should have you in one of the 3 funnels: air, fuel, mechanical, or ignition, right? So once you're in one of those funnels, you should have collected enough data saying that you're in that funnel. And from there, you want to narrow it down with tests till you have a solution. It is not okay just to fix the car. You need to go back out and test drive that car and make sure it's correct. Because the last thing you want to happen, that money light, right? We all like the money light. That money light works 2 ways. Does everyone in this realize that money light works 2 ways? You get the money and you don't fix the car, it costs you money because that customer does not pay you twice if you didn't document it. Everybody doing digital inspection? Take pictures. And I'm going to show you what you need to take pictures of here tonight. There's a lot of information out there. There's Google. There's nothing wrong with that. You have your service, your favorite service information, MotoLogic, Identifix, ProDemand, Mitchell. Great. There's Google. If you're looking for a silver bullet, that's okay, but you could need to go test the component. And don't do this. Don't call your friend Bob across town because he works on Hondas and he's great with Hondas. Bob doesn't care about your car. I'm telling you that right now, he doesn't care about your car because he has 3 in the bay that he's working on. He has 2 really good jobs sold that he has to get done. And he's going to be like, yo, I put a muffler bearing in it. It fixes that P9 1000 every time. Does Bob ever call you back to see if that muffler bearing fixed that P9 1000? No, he doesn't care. You call Bob back up and say, hey, that muffler bearing didn't fix that P19 1000. Oh, dude, I don't know, man. So don't do that. You need to test the part. If Bob tells you it's a muffler bearing, you need to go see if that muffler bearing got put in the right direction. We all okay with that? So we need to get the caveat out of the way. We're going to stay in generic OBD2 data for most of our diagnostics. The government says, hey, manufacturers, this is what you need to fix a car to keep that check engine light off so that it doesn't put out more than 1.5 the EPA standards for pollution. You need to give them this data to fix a car. If the government says it, why would we not use it if they're demanding it from us? Always going to stay in OBD2. Now, if you're doing something more complicated, a radio doesn't work, that's not going to do you any good. But on the other hand, if you walk out to your car with your scan tool and you have an enhanced scan tool, do a full code scan, take a picture. Because the last thing you want is a bunch of U codes in a GM Most radio circuit. Anybody know about GM Most radio bus? It's a big giant loop and it has nothing but problems and the screens go black all the time. The last thing you want to do is fix that misfire, and then that customer has a U code in there and they come back a week later and say, hey, my radio doesn't work. On your digital inspection, you need to be attaching everything. Everything. So helpful websites, you have Identifix, IATN, Diag.net is really good. Bob's brother is on Diag.net. Bob's brother will help you. Is anybody here a member of Diag.net? Is the best $20 a month because there's guys that live, eat, sleep, and breathe, and they will get on here and help you at nighttime. Their kids went to bed, whatever, they're fighting with the wife, and they have nothing to do, they're scrolling on their phone. Diag.net is a really good website. NASTF.org, Google, we already discussed that. There's a lot of good stuff on YouTube. A lot of friends of mine have YouTube channels. Don't believe everything you see on YouTube. You need to test it. If you're looking for that silver bullet, I fix cars off YouTube. I'm not denying that. I've found a PI that was published by GM that was never given to the public, and I found it, but I tested it, verified it, and it fixed the car. But you need to do the same thing. We have ATTS training on here and TST seminars. We have lots of videos and training on there. That's good. NASTF. So Ron got a little bit earlier on NASTF, and he said, anybody know what the LSID is? You raised your hand earlier. You have an LSID? No. Is anybody doing keys? A little bit. What tool are you using? You will not be doing keys next week. So what's going to happen with NASTF, NASTF is going to make you require what is going to be a LSID, a locksmith ID. And anything that you want to do with keys or a mobilizer, you are going to have an LSID to go in with an aftermarket scan tool and program that.
That's not like fresh program, like just adding a key to it.
Nope.
You need that as well.
Anything that's going to open up the immobilizer system, you need to look into LSID. I don't want to get too much controversial over it. There's so much out there right now. Nobody really knows the exact facts, but the email did go out. And if you have an aftermarket scan tool, you're going to have to put an LSID to do this. Problem with that is if you're not doing keys, who's put a transmission in like a 2022 Ford recently? Anybody ever put a transmission and have to program a key to it before? That is coming. There are certain manufacturers out there that say that is technically a theft deterrent device and it is emission related. You have to program the key back into it just to do a transmission. So you should look into this. It's coming. Also, NASTF has a lot of information on their website to get the OEM manufacturers so you can get the exact information on OBD2 theory. Guys, they give you the information. I don't know if you know this. If you go to like OEM1stop.com or NASTF, they will give you OBD2 information. The government said, what about OBD2? That's what we need to fix a car. Ford, if you go to Rotunda, they will give you all their OBD2 information. They will give you DTCs, how those DTCs set. They will give it all to you because the government says they have to, but we don't use it. If you want to know what a switch rate should be, or even what a switch rate is, you can go in and look at their OBD2 theory and they'll tell you how they calculate that OBD2 switch rate and what's a pass or a fail. Auto auth, anybody doing Chrysler? I only saw one DRB. Is anybody using auto auth? For the rest of the guys that aren't, if starting in 2017, and let me go back, 2016, somebody decided to hack Chrysler and take over the car through the internet. Instead of those guys going to jail, Chrysler decided, you're going to work for us. And this is what they came up with, auto auth. So you have to buy a $70 subscription and you register up to 6 people. It's yearly. And it'll say that if your scan tool's on Wi-Fi, they vet you, and then you can go in and work on a Chrysler. If you don't have this, the only thing you will get is data. You will not clear codes or do activation tests. So your scan tool needs to be a smart scan tool with Wi-Fi, and you have to be hooked up with auto auth. Is Chrysler the only one doing this? Volvo, BMW, Nissan's going to it. Nobody has said what they're going to yet, but hopefully they all use auto auth. But it's going to be a real shoot show for the owners that have to keep buying these subscriptions. Very important, Right to Repair Act. We need to get on that because Massachusetts is the only one with Right to Repair Act. And they can work on Teslas up there because if you want to sell a Tesla in Massachusetts, you better have the information and knowledge to fix that car. The rest of us, we don't have that. So it's very important when you see this Right to Repair Act stuff that you follow up, you write to Congress, you get with Ron. Ron fights for you guys, right?
Try to.
Yeah, you know, so it's very important because the Right to Repair Act, you know, realize OBD2 is only good for what? It's only good for ICE, internal combustion engines. Electric cars don't pollute. So guess what we don't get anymore? So it's very important that we stay up to date on this stuff. Scan tools are great. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this. This eScan, anybody use the eScan by Bernie Thompson? Phenomenal scan tool. It is a drivability OBD2 on steroids. He is a technician for technicians. He makes tools. And when he goes out and does mobile, he does 10 cars a day and he needs to get in and out fast. And that's why he made this scan tool. You're going to see a lot of this tonight. VCDS, Encore, Zeus, they're all good. The Cardac. Wrap is a really good tool. You got to look into it. You can buy a subscription. You buy the scan tool, but they'll put you online with any master tech. They have a master tech of every brand. The head guy for Tesla works for them. He left Tesla and now works for them. So if you have a problem with Tesla, you own that and you own the Tesla cables, he'll walk you through the problem. It's a great tool. iScan, very great on Euro stuff. It looks like the Euro software. Remember the original, there's original scan tool out there that got sued that was pretty much OEM information. Anybody remember the gray box? Not mentioning any names, but the iScan does a really good job in launching Autel. OEM scan tools are great. They all require separate laptops, or they require different dongles, or boxes, or software updates. Ford says today there's an IDS software 123. In 30 days there's going to be software update 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as opposed to GM. If GM even works today, anybody do reflashing with GM? Even through J2534, GM's a nightmare. So I'm not a big pusher on OEMs. They're nice when you need them, but I don't use them for drivability. I own a lot of them and they collect dust. Unless I'm really getting my butt kicked from something, they're not my go-to. We're not working on this stuff anymore. Points, condensers, carburetors, that's not where we're at anymore. We're seeing hybrids, EV extended ranges, Teslas. Anybody doing a lot with electric yet? We'll see if the next, presidential debate, if electric's even around anymore, or if we're going all in. But it's coming, it's out there. There's good money in it. Got to be safe. Let's talk about how the computer system works. So here we have what we call a fuel injector waveform. We'll get more detail. In the back, we'll just use an oxygen sensor, right? The battery. The battery is probably the most important part on the car. It is the bank account of the car. If you do not have a good battery, you do not pass go, you do not collect $200. How much voltage should be in a battery? 12.6. New AGM and enhanced flooded batteries need to be 12.8. If you don't know that, you need to write that down. Because the next part I'm going to tell you is what is the minimum voltage on a battery test with your multimeter? I heard it. I'm hearing numbers.
Somebody said 10 over here.
It should be 10.2. With the new elevated voltage, it needs to be 9.6 is no longer the number. It's 10.2. Your bank account or your battery is the heartbeat of the car. Your alternator is the economy. If you're losing money in your bank account, you better figure out what's wrong with your economy, right? If you don't have $12.60 in your bank account, there's something wrong with the economy. You better check your alternator. On that note, do not go test a part on a car and not pay it $12.60. Do you think it's going to work for $6.30? Any part in the car is going to work for half the voltage. Would you work for half your labor rate? Don't expect parts on the car to. Guys do this all the time. Well, it tested bad. Well, what is bad? Well, it had $11, it had $11.50. What's your labor rate? Did you work for $11.50? No, it needs $12.6. If the economy's good, 1 volt higher, it needs to be what? It needs to be $13.6. You need to have a good economy. Don't pay it minimum wage. Pay it what it's worth. Everybody okay with that? As soon as I start to mention money, everybody gets it. So the crankshaft position sensor tells us the speed. Mass airflow tells us how many grams per second we have, right? So at 600 at idle, hot load, idle RPM, and 600 RPM, the PCM knows that on a 5.0 liter, we're gonna have 5 grams per second, right? The computer's job is to sense, compare, and adjust. So it says I have 5 grams per second at 600 RPM, and it looks at my rear O2, I should be at 450 millivolts, right? If it's the perfect fuel ratio. Now it looks at that and says I have 5 grams of air, I have 600 RPM, but now I'm at 200 millivolts. What do I got to do as a PCM? What am I adjusting for? Come on, we're fixing this car. It's in your bay. It's running lean, right? So what do we got to do to make it not lean? We got to add more fuel. So what's this injector waveform going to do? It's going to widen, right? So now the same thing, the same numbers, and the rear O2 is 800 millivolts. What kind of problem do we have now? Rich. So what are we going to do? So what's going to happen to that waveform? Short. Perfect. But that's how the computer is going to do its job. It's going to sense, compare, and adjust. And how much money are we going to pay this computer on a good economy? On a good economy. 13.6. That's right. 13.6. You better have 13.6. Monitors. There are certain things. Anybody have a problem not getting monitors to run? Sometimes. I never really have. I hear stories out there, and the couple ones that I've had kick, I've been able to come up with a solution for. But top 6 reasons that monitors don't run are the incorrect engine coolant antifreeze. Is anybody measuring their antifreeze with a multimeter? Looking for electrolysis? So if you take your negative battery terminal and you put your positive terminal in it, if you have more than 300 millivolts, that coolant got to go because it's ground. Don't put your probes the other way. You're going to get battery voltage because it's going to ground out. But what is that going to do to your engine coolant temperature sensor? Right? Defective engine thermostat. Maybe we have one that's just stuck open a little bit and we're not getting the operating temperature. I've seen transmissions put in cars for bad thermostats, right? Because they just didn't hit the mark. Crankshaft relearn. Does anybody know what a crankshaft relearn is? Are we doing it? You need to be doing it. I'm going to show you some examples later why you need to be doing it. Vehicle fuel level has to be 15 to 85%. On a Toyota, it needs to be 50%. DTCs are pending codes. Now you're going to ask me, well, I would know there's pending codes. You do not know if there's pending codes if you are going in with an enhanced scan tool. They do not give you enhanced scan tools. They do not give you pending codes. They give you history codes. They give you current codes, but they don't give you pending codes. Who here uses a Snap-on? You ever notice when it says DTCs, what are the three numbers next to it? Mode 3, 7, and 10, right? It says 3, 7, and 10. That's pending codes, current codes, and permanent codes. That's where you're going to get it under OBD2. That you're not going to see it on enhanced or OEM software. Incorrect battery or charging voltage. I think I covered that enough, how important that is. So when you're doing your digital inspection, you always want to take, this is the e-scan that we were talking about, take a snapshot. If your car is in for a misfire, right, or misfire monitor ran, is everybody okay with the monitors? Misfire, fuel system, and comprehensive component are what kind of monitors? They're continuous monitors. They constantly run. Comprehensive is anything other than this. Oxygen sensor, monitor, heated monitor, or heated cat, right? Because we have to monitor under certain conditions. When the car's hot, we stop using O2 current, so we can't measure the heater circuit, right? We only have that first minute and a half of the day to run that test. Everything else is like Ford key on engine run. Anyone know what the key on engine run test is? It just goes out and pings everything. It says, ECT, you're good, you're short of the voltage, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? It just does everything. That's what the comprehensive component monitor does. It just runs everything. So you're in here for a P0305. You fix your P0305. This is where the money light's going to come into play. You park that car and it sits there for 3 days because they're on vacation. What do you think is going to run while that car sits there on a newer vehicle? Natural vehicle leak detection. If you don't tell that customer up front, what's that money light going to do? It's going to cost you money now. Always, always, always make sure to see if all your monitors are on. I can't clear that enough. You could also have another problem. Maybe that hasn't ran yet and your misfire is a stuck purge valve. So you need to go in there and see, did that monitor run? And then we're going to go in and look how close is it to running. So Volkswagen, Audi, we're all emission state. We have the monitors here. I wish every scan tool did this. Anybody ever run the OBD2 monitors through a Volkswagen, Audi? Volkswagen, Audi will allow you to run the monitors through the scan tool. They're not supposed to be able to, but they already had it in place before they made the law. So you can go in and you can hit the readiness test. It'll say this function is going to create readiness codes automatically and all routines are stored in the engine control module. It's going to tell you test requirements, make sure your O2 is tight, your intake air temperature is above 80 degrees, your boo and your brake switch work. Did you meet these requirements? Downtime, 300 seconds off, electric parking brake on, automatic selector level and park. It's going to tell you to run through all this. You know what automated tests are. Then it'll tell you pass, 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 pass. If you have a fail, you need to go and look for codes. But you could actually set your monitors with this. You can also do this on some newer GMs. You can run the evap test and it'll actually run it for you. Like when you do an in-bay evap test, it'll actually run that monitor and store it for you. But you only have a small slice of time. Once it's up to operating temperature, it won't allow you to do that. I'm going to show you later how to get around that. Can you guys see this back here? You guys good? So we'll talk about the modes of OBD2. Powertrain data. You want to use generic data because if you're not a Euro guy, you don't know what absolute long-term adaption is or off-idle adaption. That is long-term and short-term fuel trim in a Euro. When you go into powertrain diagnostic data, it's just going to say short-term, long-term. It makes it simple. Also, you know what they can't do here? They can't substitute value. Has anybody ever been burned by substitute value? So they're going to look at the intake air temperature sensor isn't reading right. They're going to go out and look at the ambient air temperature sensor and they're just going to say, hey, it's 80 degrees outside. We got to be somewhere near that. Or we've been running for 20 minutes and our hood is shut. We're probably going to be 100 degrees. But they can't substitute that voltage in here. They're not allowed to do it. Freeze frame data. This goes back to the 8-step diagnostic process. You have to know when to drive the vehicle, right? You have to know it's a snapshot. It's either before, current, or after, a little bit. But it goes back to that stalling situation. When are you going to drive that car? A lot of guys do not look at this freeze frame data. And I'm not trying to harp on this. I fixed a lot of cars by just looking at freeze frame data and never test driving them. Anybody seen a Ford with a P2196? Bank 1, sensor 1 stuck rich? You will go into freeze frame data. You're going to see that the front O2 sensor is negative 900 milliamps. You're going to see the rear O2 is 955 positive volts. You're going to see evap fuel pressure is negative 4,000 kPa. And then you're going to look at purge and say it's not purging. I didn't even leave the bay. I didn't leave the parking lot. And I already know I have a stuck open purge valve. Freeze frame data. You have to go there. No one goes there. I don't know why. 4 drives me nuts. Don't clear the codes. Don't hit that button. Unless the car's stuck in limp home mode and you can't do nothing, don't hit that button. You erase everything. You erase your codes, your freeze frame, any data that you had. Don't erase it unless you have to. And if you do, digital inspection, you better take a picture of it because you need to know when that car broke. 5, oxygen sensor, mode 5. This was only GM, Toyota, and it was non-canned vehicles. You won't really see a lot of this, but it was your oxygen sensor outputs. And it would tell you how many oxygen sensor cars they had and the criteria if they were between lean or failing. If you don't see anything there, you're going to go into mode 5. Anyone know what mode 5 is? Mode 5 is your non-continuous monitors. It was everything in the car that it's testing and running. How many trips do we need before the check engine light comes on? 2 is going to set pending, 3 is going to set the light on. So it's a quiz. First quiz, you got a 70%. Oh man, I better study. Second quiz, you get a 70%. Now the test comes, or the final comes. You get a 60. Well, now you get a report card. You get an F. You failed the class. It's putting the light on. Mode 6 is your test parameters, and you're going to be able to use this data to see how far off something failed by, a lot of it. And we're going to see that. This is a very useful tool. So if you're not using that, make sure you're using this after tonight I show you. 7, request of onboard monitor systems. I've never seen a scan tool do this, but you're supposedly be able to go in and turn an evap purge valve on. But I've never seen it yet on any scan tool that I own, and I own a lot of them. 9, request vehicle information. How many people go into mode 9? Go into mode 9, because the last thing you want to be burnt by is the wrong VIN in a car from a used computer. How do you know that you even have the right computer in the car? Wouldn't it be a lot easier to say, man, the last 6 digits is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this says it's 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right? I'm going to be like, something not right. Recently, I was working on a Power Stroke diesel 6.7, and they did an update. And the shop couldn't figure out it came from a used car lot the light was on. It had a crankcase pressure sensor code. Well, when you do a reflash on a Ford on a 6.7, it's going to ask you what color your connector is at the breather box. If you answer that question wrong, it is going to set a crankcase ventilation code for a California emissions car. And your car is a non-California emissions car. So how much time are you going to waste when you could have just went and looked at the calibration file and said, oh, crap, somebody put the wrong flash in here. Also, this also has your part number in here. So if you have a TSB and it says if your software is not up to date and it's 324 and you need 345, you need to reflash. So you need to be looking at mode 9 data. Permanent codes, mode 0A/10. Does anyone know what this is? I'm going to make your night then knowing what mode 10 is. Mode 10 is a non-clearable code. You can clear that code out in your scan tool and it's not going to go away. Anybody have a car that was fixed and you cleared the code, it wouldn't go away? That is mode 10. There is no condition disconnecting the battery, driving that car. It's whenever the car says that we're good, that not 40 warm-up cycles, not 3 trips. When it says it's good, it's good. It'll clear that light. What does that do for you guys? How many have a parts store down the street that sells everybody parts and then they clear the code for them when they come back? Now, you go to mode 10, your code's going to be in there. So you start, it started 2010, mode 10, 2010. So now, let's put our investigative ears on. Does the customer ever be honest with you? Do they ever come and say, oh, my husband tried to fix the car? Never, never, never. Now, on the other hand, the husband will be like, my wife tried to fix the car and she screwed it up. That works. It's so opposite. It's amazing. The wife won't throw the husband under the bus, but the husband will do it. Or the husband will be like, yeah, my wife took it to Jack somewhere. You know what I mean? They throw it totally under the bus. So now you go into monitors. They're not set. None of the monitors are set. Freeze frame data is gone. But you have a permanent code in mode 10. 2 things happened. Either the battery died or somebody's been in there. But either way, you're going back up to your service writer and be like, I need a battery after you test it. Or, hey, what's going on with this car? Because Even if the battery died, I shouldn't have codes in mode 10. So go into mode 10, because if you have a problem, the code will be in there. So this is Ford using IDS. So let's look at how this works. You have mids, TIDs, and IDs. So when you're in mode 6, this is mode 6 now. Everyone okay with that? These are all your different descriptions of your tests that you can run. The mid is the kind of test that it's going to run. So see how we can have rear to front switch ratio 21, but then we can have, let's use this heater current test 2 and then switch point test 2. It's the same type of test, it's just on 2 different components that they're looking for. So then in that value, you're going to have a value, and that's the grade that it needs. It needs a 70% to pass. If you're in Pennsylvania, no child left behind, you need a 70% to pass. So then you're going to have your minimum value, and then you're going to have a max. So let's look at this heater current. The minimum is 0.465 amps. The maximum is 3 amps. Our value is 1.642 amps. Are we good? Are we going to set a light? Now, what if it was the other way? What if our current was almost 6 amps? We're going to set a light, right? Because we're above that. So if you think you have a problem, you could start going in and looking at this stuff. Maybe you think your evap or your purge problem, right? Maybe you notice that the evap monitor hasn't run, and you get down here and it says -3 and the minimum value is 0. Are you going to set a code for that? Do you need to make them aware, hey, I can fix your 305, but you're going to have an evap problem because it's already starting to see that it failed. So you need to go in and look at this stuff. Also, who's chased a misfire on cylinder 3 and it's not 3, a Nissan, and it ends up being cylinder 2. You can go into mode 6 and look at the actual misfire data, and I'll show you that here. See how it's down here? It'll say total engine misfire threshold. You can actually look at these and see which cylinders are misfiring. The proper cylinders are misfiring. So now here's another set of freeze frame data. So let's look at this. Vapor leak 1 passed, minimum was 7.96, test value was 20. Are we okay with that? Because there's no maximum number. It just can't be below the minimum. We have a fail here, 5.862, and our test value is 5.49. Our minimum, and our test value. Are we lower? We're going to have a problem. Purge VSV, 3.14, 0.091, pass. Am I going to look at the purge valve and the canister close valve on this car? It's an evap problem. Let's just talk about an evap problem. No, it tells me I passed. I don't even have to look at that. On a Toyota, this has the canister with the 2 diaphragms on each side, left side's fresh air, right side's tank side. That's what I'm looking at. See how I'm speeding up the process here by using mode 6 data? Everybody okay with that? Because this is your best friend right here. This is where you get your diagnostics down. You get them down fast. Permanent codes. So this is using that eScan. It's eScan. See how it'll say DTCs that cause the freeze frame storage? None. If we hit the permanent code button, these are all our codes, 430, 420, and a P0300. They will still be in there. This is an OBD2 scan tool on cracks. Monitors not complete, 6. Somebody cleared my codes. I have no regular codes, but I have permanent codes, and my monitors are not complete. Somebody erased them. Because right here, charging voltage is good. It tells you my engine vacuum is low. It'll tell you time and temperature, and it'll tell you your fuel trims just on the side of the screen without even being in the tool. It is amazing, amazing tool. So we're going to talk about no, we're not, because we only want to. So once we know that our battery is good and everything is going well, we need to do a relative compression test. Anybody familiar with relative compression testing? So Ford, the manufacturers, the technicians were hanging parts on the cars. Because what is the hardest thing to roll out on a car? Mechanical, right? You could swap a coil, you could swap a plug. At the dealership, you could walk out to the lot and take a car off a brand new vehicle and put it on. But mechanical, right? You got to pull a compression gauge out. You got to do a leak down test. If that intake is covering those back 6 plugs, the back 3 plugs, it's the hardest thing to do. Ford said, we need to come up with a better way to stop hanging parts on cars so that we can't misdiagnose them. So they came up with relative compression testing. So what Ford's IDS will do, your Snap-on will do it, but it'll do it a little bit different. All of them will do it on a Ford. So you can see here, cylinder 1 is good, 2. We have a problem with cylinder 7, 2, 6 is low, 5 is low, 8 is low. So now on a Ford, one bank is 1, 2, 3, 4. Right bank is 5, 6, 7, 8. What kind of problem do you think we have on this? Timing, right? The whole bank is off. Just by going to toolbox and hitting relative compression, it'll tell you wide open throttle, fuel, so it cuts the fuel off, and it'll tell you to crank for 10 seconds, and it'll give you a bar graph. Snap-on will do this, Topton will do this. They just do it really nice in here. Toyota does the exact same thing. They give you your values of the speed difference between the cranking RPM, and what they do is they lay them on top of each other. See how all these are different colors here? If one was moving slower or faster than the other one, because a faster speeding cylinder could cause a misfire, they would be higher than the other. So show you a difference in cranking RPM from cylinder to cylinder. Everybody okay with that? The eScan will do this on every car. Does anybody know how it'll do this on every car? It'll do it on every car. It'll do it on a diesel. It's a wireless dongle. Does anybody know how they do it? Battery voltage. What 2 pins at the OBD2 plug would we get battery voltage from? 16 and 4, not 5. 5 is sensor ground. You have to use 16 and 4. You could do this with your lab scope, but the eScan will do this on every car. It not only will it give you the bar graph down here, obviously we have a problem in this cylinder, but it'll actually give you the voltage variation across the top. So you're in the car, and you always want to do this twice, right? Because not all mechanical problems are cold, not all mechanical problems are hot. So I always recommend this twice. If you get a fail, do it twice. Make sure you back up, because if one test was good, 2 are what? Better. Thank you. If you do this in the parking lot, you walk the scan tool out to the car. On that note, the biggest mistake I see, technicians get their digital dispatch to them, and they go to the car, and they drive the car, and they bring it back in the bay. Now they're testing. Do cars break in the bay? No, they break out on the road. You need to walk the scan tool to the car. Do not drive the car to the scan tool. You are wasting time. You get your RO, you get your scanner, and you walk out to the car, and you start your 8-step diagnostic process. You do your visual inspection, you start pulling codes, and you do your relative compression cold, and you do it back in the bay when you're hot. I'm very passionate about this. I ran a shop for a really long time, and it made me so mad when I saw my guys drive the car to the scan tool. It does you no good. You just wasted 20 minutes on the road. You need to be in that scan tool collecting data. Everybody okay with that? So this tool is phenomenal because it gives you relative compression testing on every car. So this is using a Fluke 190 lab scope. We have a problem here. This here, I'm not driving the car. If I do this twice, my problem's mechanical. I'm probably going back in the bay. But what about this? This one's easy. It tells you it's bad. What about this one? No more than 20% deviation. So see how we have 80, 60, 40? So if here's 20 and that's 0, are we above 20? Well, we're good. You got to have a 20% variance before I would chase that. If it was less than that, I would put it in the back of my mind. If there was nothing there, I would chase it. But I'm going to put it in the back of my mind. Everybody okay with that? Just trying to help you fix cars as fastly as you can. You know, time is money. You know, Benjamin Franklin said, what, anyone know what Franklin said? Yeah. Well, besides being on the $100 bill and being dead, if you plan to fail, you better fail to plan. So when you're out on the road and you better drive that scan, you better walk that scan tool to the car, and you better have a game plan, because you're going to miss all this data. If you had a sticking valve cold, are you going to catch it when you bring it into bay hot? No. This is the stuff we all need to be doing. This is using a lab scope. We're using a lab scope AC coupled. See how we're going above and below 0 volts? We're AC coupled. Will we agree? Is the top good or bad? We're looking at the voltage drops. We want to look at the voltage drops, that they're all the same, and the space is even between all of them. We agree that's okay. Will we agree that we have a problem with cylinder 4 and 2 on the bottom? So when you have your lab scope, you can go across the battery on AC voltage if you don't have an amp clamp, or you can go to pin 6 and 14 in your OBD2 breakout box, and you can get this. So just because you don't have a scan tool, but I know if you have a Topton, Altel, they all come with lab scopes anymore. Get it out, get the leads out of the bag, and start using this thing. Lab scopes are something you have to use every day, and you have to practice it. And once you practice it, you'll become efficient at it. I don't care if you test every battery on every car with it. You'll learn how to set it up. But this is the stuff where we're really going to get to. What do we think about this car? Help me fix this car. Is this a good or a bad? I hear bad. Yeah, we're bad, right? 3, we definitely have a low cylinder in 3. What we think of, obviously this is bad. So what we have here is we have nothing. So we have a piston came up on top dead center, and we have a voltage drop. Do we have a voltage drop? No. Piston came up on top dead center, voltage drop. Piston came up on top dead center, voltage drop. So the gaps, you're missing a gap, and we don't have a voltage drop. We have a bad cylinder. You can add a sync to this. You can sync to an ignition probe, and it would tell you what the cylinder is, but it's just a no-go test. If they were even, I'm going to move on. I'm not going to set a sync up. Now that they're off, now I want to add the sync. But why do an extra step if I don't have to? I just want to know mechanical integrity. This is good, right? They're all even. Okay with that? My guys in the back that are quiet, help me fix this. Everyone agree with that? That's okay? This is using an amp clamp now. This is the easiest way to do it because a lot of your scopes are set up to hit amp clamp. If you go into a snap-on, it'll say relative compression test, hook your amp clamp up. So what we're doing is now instead of looking at the voltage drop, we're looking at the peak current. Came up on compression, we have current. Came up on compression, we have current. Came up on compression, we have current. See how they're all even across and the spaces are even? If we had a low one, we'd have a bad cylinder. This is doing it right from the OBD2 plug, right? You have a Chrysler 300, Jeep Cherokee, the battery's under the passenger seat, right? That's a pain. You could do it right through the OBD2 box with a breakout box. This is an incredible breakout box. There's all kinds out there. You need a breakout box, especially if you're going to start doing CAN diagnostics. So let's look at this. Is this good or bad? Not a trick question. Looks good. And pay attention to that valve. If you can get air in that cylinder, you can compress that cylinder. So relative compression testing, 90% of the time will be okay, but if you rule everything out, you might want to come back to it. So obviously this is an MDS system. Everyone familiar with MDS? Multi-displacement cylinders. We cut the inner 4 cylinders out and we run it as a 4-cylinder. They have special lifters in these cams that lock out the hydraulics so that the push rod doesn't move up and down. The lifter just rides and it's like a big pillow. It's just a cushion. Everybody okay with that? Because what I want to show you next, look at that. This is that special lifter. Look at that cam. Look at the roller. It just flattened the roller and took that cam out. See how it did that? It'll set a misfire, but it'll show up on relative compression testing just fine. That's really hard to tell with a leak down test too. Why is that really hard to tell with a leak down test? Exactly. See how this is starting to get, you know? These are the ones that'll kick your butt. Go ahead, sir. Okay, Penn Star. Yep.
One cylinder, the other one didn't. Misfire.
Yeah.
You know, we figured it out, pulled the valve.
Yep.
Is there any way to figure that without pulling the valve cover?
How you would do that, you would do that in cylinder compression testing. And I'll show that later in that class. You'd actually see that the intake pocket never actually pulled into an intake vacuum. Engine vacuum too. I don't know if they put a vacuum gauge on this, but would we have probably pulled 18 to 21 inches of vacuum? Probably not. So there's other ways. Remember I said something could test good, but then something could test bad. So you need to have more than one tool in your box that you can go to. So obviously that's the new cam, double lobes, and that one's worn out. All right, so let's go over this. 5-minute no start, having your game plan. Your old school vacuum guy, what was a good cranking vacuum on a motor? 2? 3 to 5 is normally. I'm going to tell you a lot of these variable displacement motors nowadays. Realize we got to get the motor to 600 RPM. Would you say that we nowadays have more control over fuel or air? We have more control over fuel, right? IAC's gone. We can only close that throttle body off so much. But now, can't we move cam gears? Can't we advance or retard the cam gear to get the idle RPM where we need to be? So 3 to 5 is a good number. Just know that like turbo, variable valve time, and it's all going to come into play. It's just one of those things that you have to know, you know, come about. Fuel with propane. If it starts off propane, it's probably a fuel issue, right? What if it's a crankshaft sensor and the injectors aren't firing? You have to know the limits to your tests and your tools. When you do this, you have to let that propane flow for a minute or two. Don't go just and think it's going to start. It's not going to do it. 5-gas analyzer, if you were to use gas guy, good. 2,885 ppms. You're not going to start it off 185 ppms. Ignition spark plug tester. I want everyone ask yourself, is that the spark plug tester that you have? Mm-hmm. That's the one you need to have. The little orange LED that lights up, it's garbage. Get rid of it. The little plastic one that just shoots through it, garbage. Get rid of it. You need to crank this thing all the way out, and that'll give you 60 to 80,000 kilovolts. That you're going to know if you have a good coil or not. But you need to get yourself one of those. The other ones don't work. Engine RPM. What are we going to use that for? Okay. So if you look at this car, it doesn't start and you see 200 RPM. Do you have a crankshaft sensor issue? You may or you may not. If you lose a crankshaft sensor, does the car eventually start? What's it start off of? Cam gear. So now I'm a scan tool and I need to get this car started. What do I need to do? Just take my camshaft position sensor, divide it by 2, because I spin at twice the amount of speed, and now I have engine RPM. So that is not a good way of testing a car anymore to see if a crankshaft sensor works. Everybody okay with that? BMW will do it. Kia Hyundai will do it. And I only know BMW will do it, and I know Kia and Hyundai will do it because I purposely had drivability issue where I unplugged the sensor, and I watched them substitute the values in it. So just know that is an old school tactic. Back pressure. What's your back pressure be at cranking? Probably 0. You're not doing anything, right? You know, combustion, nothing's happening. No more at idle, probably like a half a PSI. And if you're about 1,000 RPM, no more than probably 1.5 PSI. You know, think about it. That's what we do with cars, right? We put ceramic coated headers on cars. We put bigger headers on cars. We don't want back pressure. You could literally put an exhaust glove on and start choking out the exhaust and bring up your fuel trims and look at your manifold map sensor, and you'll start to see when you're bogging that motor out how much back pressure that motor really needs to run. We do that in our engine drivability class. Fuel trim cells. Anybody know what fuel trim cell 14 is? I brain farted, I'm tired. That's a lot of information to give you. GM block learn, that's what that is. That's old school block learn. Anyone remember 0 to 256 and 128 was perfect fuel trim? So it was 255, but 0 counts as 1, so there was 0 to 256. Half of that was 128. Anything less than 128 was lean. Anything above that was rich. And that fuel trim shell, I'm going to skip ahead here. Stay where you guys are at. I just want to show you this. So this is what that old school fuel trim was. So we had, depending on our map sensor, we had at 0 to 700 RPM and 32% load. And we had 1200 RPM, but see how we had 15 blocks? So 0 to 6 were idle, and then roughly 14 to 15, 14, down here from 12 to 14 were our high RPM loads. That's where that number comes from. So I'll tell you what fuel trim cell you're coming. Fuel trim, look at this right here. Just looking at the numbers in all these fuel trim cells, are we lean or rich? Someone said it. We're lean, so we're adding fuel. So now we would know we have a drivability issue in all ranges because we're adding fuel throughout the entire 14, 15 blocks. What do you guys think about the bottom? Opposite. Okay, so I'm going to jump back now. So we see that fuel trim cell 14. I just want you to know that that was obviously wide open throttle or so on. So now what Bernie did in his tool, in his ATS tool, instead of using map, because doesn't a map sensor fail or a mass airflow fail, they could underreport. So he didn't use that. He used a throttle position sensor for his load. And then we have RPM. So then in all these blocks, we have different fuel trim cells. Everybody okay with that? So that's why I want to gear you up with it. All these are different loads and RPMs, 100% load, 6,000 RPM. And then these are our fuel trim cells, what we're doing. Also, if you weren't in that screen, over here it would tell you if you had a fuel trim problem or not. It would say rich, lean, or centered. So looking at this, we have 23% on both banks at the bottom. We're okay at the top. What kind of problem do you think we'd have on a mass airflow car? Anybody? I know I heard it over here. I was trying to... What do you guys think in the back? We're adding fuel, closed throttle, sitting at idle, but under wide open throttle, we're okay. We're at a vacuum leak, right? We have 18 and 21 inches of vacuum here. Do we have vacuum at wide open throttle? No, you're pretty much just going to have a vacuum leak. Mechanical problems normally don't cause a fuel trim issue. Mechanical misfire doesn't really cause a fuel trim issue. Lack of fuel will really swing your fuel trim. So everybody okay with that we probably have a vacuum leak? Because we're going here with someone. I need you guys to understand this because you need to understand, is it the air metering side or is it the fuel side? So everybody okay with that? At idle here, we are adding 23% fuel, and wide open we're not. We have a vacuum leak. So we have 23% at the bottom and 23% at the top. All the way through, we're adding 23% fuel trim. What kind of problem do you think we have? No one's wrong. We're here to learn. Talk about it. Probably not. This is a sensor issue. If we have a sensor with a bad ground, what does a bad ground do? It elevates it, right? So if what we should have is 0.5 volts, now we're 1 volt. Aren't we going to be a half a volt off all the way through? So that could be an engine coolant temp sensor, a mass airflow sensor, anything that's going to probably skew that all the way through. I've only seen that one time where it was rich all the way through. It was a fuel trim and all 4 injectors were clogged. When are you really going to see that? But there was a way to rule that out. It was a Toyota. Yeah. But there's going to be a way that we're going to show you later on how you can figure out if that's that or not. So now we have fuel trims are good at the bottom, but we're adding 23% fuel at the top. What kind of problem do we have? We have a fuel delivery issue. We don't need lots of fuel, right? On cars with brushless fuel pumps and driver modules now, how hard do they really work that pump at idle? We don't need a lot of fuel to keep a car running at idle. When do we need fuel? Wide open throttle. So now we're running out of fuel or volume, and now we're adding it at the top end. Everybody okay with that? So this is where on his tool, this is where fuel trims would be from the 0 to 6 range. And then up top would be our 10 to 15 cells. That's where we got that block learn and long-term learn from. This is volumetric efficiency. So if we knew in every one of these cells, right, the amount of RPM in the load we're at in the grams per second, and what is perfect fuel ratio? 14.7 to 1. So if we knew we had 5 grams per second at 500 RPM, we need to know the amount of fuel to make that perfect 14 to 7 to 1 fuel ratio. So that's where volumetric efficiency comes in. This is off of tuning software. We know our load, our RPM, and our air, and we can figure out the perfect fuel ratio for any of that. Well, anyone doing anything with volumetric efficiency? Volumetric efficiency is what's going to tell you apart from an air problem or a sensor problem or a mechanical problem. We're going to get there. I'm going to blow through this real fast because it's 7:20. Always do your visual inspections. This car has a VTEC problem. Need to check to make sure you have the right amount of oil. Make sure that it's full. Do a visual inspection and make sure that the oil filter is not crushed. Somebody didn't wrench it on there. This was actually starving it for fuel. Everybody okay with that? Because, sorry, I don't mean to cut it, just. Another one, this is another car. I just want to touch on this. If you're working on something that you don't know and you can't find the specifications, call the OEM manufacturer, call the Mercedes or the BMW dealership and say, I have this G-Class here. How much oil and what kind of oil does it take? This car had a misfire problem because not only was too much oil put in it, it was the wrong oil. It went to another shop. They fixed the car. The lady went back and sued the other shop and got all her money. So make sure you put the right amount of oil in the correct oil. The other shop did all kinds of diagnostic tests at the lady's request. They did it. They billed her. She went back and sued the other shop and won. So if you don't know the correct amount of oil and the right oil that it takes, make sure you're doing it. This is an oil analyzer. If you ever had to send oil out for analyzation, this is what they're going to do. This was in upstate New York at G. Trulia's. He does a lot of work in the state of New York. All their oil gets drained and run through this machine on oil changes. It'll tell you what the oil is. It'll tell you the metals in the oil. And in that metals, it'll tell you, is it cam bearing metal? Is it crank bearing? It'll tell you everything just by running oil through this machine. Way too expensive. You know what I mean? Only the state of New York can spend that kind of money, you know? So this is volumetric efficiency. So in the right here is theoretical airflow, right? If we knew the weight of the air, the barrel, right? How much air at sea level we are. If we knew the temperature of the air, right? These molecules are smaller when they're cold, bigger when they're hot. If we knew the engine size, how much air we should theoretically flow at that temperature and that load, we should be able to calculate how much air the motor actually enters. Everybody okay with that? That's theoretical airflow. The yellow is the actual airflow read from the mass airflow sensor. See how the yellow is low beneath the red all the way through? And then he goes one step further and he graphs it for you. So this could be a couple different issues. What would cause our mass airflow reading to be lower than what it should be? Clogged air filter. Could be an exhaust clog. Could be a mechanical issue. So what's going to happen on volumetric efficiency, if your VE is low and your fuel trims are normal, you have a mechanical problem, right? Because we read the amount of air, the correct amount of air, and we didn't make a fuel trim change. Remember the beginning of the class? Sense, compare, and adjust. If our VE is low and our fuel trims are positive, we have an airflow sensor issue, right? So if we're adding fuel, we got the air. We either didn't report the right amount of air or air went around the mass airflow sensor, right? Because we could have a broken boot. Maybe the box wasn't put together right. But what do you need to do if you're going to condemn that mass airflow? You need to make sure it's getting paid. If you ain't paying it, don't expect it to do its job. Everybody okay with that? So here, they're laying right on top of each other. So see how here they're low, and see here they're laying right on top of each other? All right, so now we're low. See these little squiggly, looks like Bart Simpson? What do we think that is? That is air coming through the motor. So what do we think those squigglies are? What was that? Could be. Can't get the air out of the motor. You can't inhale what you can't get out. That is a clogged catalytic converter. So it's actually like trying to push itself through the honeycomb section of the catalytic converter. If you saw that and no fuel trim change, you have a clogged cat. So see how by knowing our fuel trim, which way the fuel trim failed, and our mass airflow, we can report, is it a sensor, is it the air side, or do we have a mechanical issue? If anything besides using OBD2 data, I want you to take this away tonight. You do not need the scan tool to do this. You can go online and get a VE calculator and fill it out. It'll ask you for grams per second, RPM, and it'll tell you your theoretically and your actual. You don't need this tool to do it. This tool is just really nice with all the other features. So everybody okay with that? If VE is low and no fuel trim change, you have what kind of problem? Some kind of mechanical issue. If your VE is low and you're adding fuel, what kind of problem do you have? Some kind of underreporting issue, right? So everybody with me, because that is just powerful stuff. When I found this, I fixed cars. Because the old school way, I'm telling you, of Fox body, what, a 5.0 liter, reading 5 grams of air is an old school way of doing things. Because now we have variable valve timing, we have intake runners, we have variable lift, we have 1.5 liter motors now. Do you think that little 1.5 is going to pull 1.5 grams of air? No, you really need to be using this. If you don't do this, you know what the other two things that you can do, and only in OBD2 you can do this. You might have it in manufacturer. Calculated load and absolute load value PIDs, but you need to be over 90%. 90%, if you're 90% and your fuel trim, if you're not at 90, it's like having low VE, and you would diagnose it the same way. Everybody okay with that? It's 7:27. You guys want to take a 10-minute break? Then we'll get into the fuel side of things. And if you guys have questions, you can come up and ask at the break.
There's some food left if you guys want to grab some more food real quick. Okay, we're going to get started in a minute. If you looked at the topic of next month's meeting, it's EV cars. I've been asked to do some EV training. Is everybody working on Teslas? Everybody has a couple Teslas that come in? All right. So that's what I was asked. That's what we're going to have. It's going to be a Thursday night instead of a Wednesday night. My question is, anybody have a Tesla they can bring in? Anybody have a customer who will let me bring your Tesla in? You can call me, let me know. If we can get a Tesla, we can do some hands-on stuff right in the shop, some classroom, and some in the shop. So keep that in mind. Thanks for being here. Let's start back over to Josh.
All right, everybody got a drink. Everybody rested. Did a refuel. We're at 50% fuel. I can run an evap test now, right? We're a Toyota. We're above 50% energy level, right? Come on. Good. Can I get you for another hour or so? We good? Because I can keep going. I like to hear myself talk. We good? All right, let's go. Like a spark plug. Just advanced my timing. Had a sip of coffee. All right, so everything to this point has gotten us to a drivability issue. We should have collected data. We should be able to figure out if it's an air fuel side or if it's a mechanical side. Between relative compression, volumetric efficiency, and looking at fuel trims and mode 6 data, are we okay to this point? Because now we're going to get into the fuel side of things. Everybody know what these waveforms are up here? Fuel injector waveforms. So this is your typical saturated standard fuel injector, what you're going to see on returnless fuel system all the way up to GDI. Anybody know the resistance on these injectors? 12 to 15 ohms. Ohm's law, 12 divided by 12, about 1 amp of current. All right, I call this the Sir Mix-a-Lot waveform. What did Sir Mix-a-Lot like? Come on, say it. Everyone knows Sir Mix-a-Lot. What do you like? You like big butts. This is called your pintle hump here. Right here, this is your pintle hump. Sir Mix-a-Lot like big pintle humps. So what we're going to have is source voltage. Computer's going to control the circuit for a set amount of time, and it's going to fire. That voltage spike needs to be at least 35 volts. If you don't know that, write that down. If you don't have 35 volts, you have some kind of voltage drop. It also needs to be thick. It needs to have a gap. Sir Mix-a-Lot liked them thick. Cosmo magazine wasn't down with that, right? You like big pintle humps. You need to see a pintle hump. If you don't have a pintle hump, don't take it. Don't take it home to meet mom. Just don't. Now, if it starts twerking like Cardi B in a rap video, you don't want that either. Don't take that home to meet mom. That means something's dirty about it. The pintle's getting stuck. So just remember, that is the Sir Mix-a-Lot waveform. Anything with a rod wrapped around iron, you're going to have a Sir Mix-a-Lot waveform, whether that's a purge valve, anything. So that's the Sir Mix-a-Lot waveform. You might think a lot of stuff about me tonight, like this guy sucks, or he's the best, but you're going to remember Sir Mix-a-Lot next time you look at one of these waveforms. So this is a peak and hold injector right here. I could tell you this is a Bosch. If it was a GM, it would pull flat. On a Bosch, this is going to pull somewhere about 6 amps. If it was a GM, it's going to pull about 4 amps. What happens is here, they pull it down with a faster amp, then they step it up. They use a special transistor, and then it pulls about 900 milliamps. The total on time is from the time it pulled down to the time it released. And what do we have here? What is that? That's a big pintle hump. Got to have big pintle humps. Down here, this is a performance injector. So on this performance injector, it's going to step up and it's going to pull about 7 amps. Battery voltage is going to come down. It's going to pull about 7 amps of current, and it's going to pulse with it to about 900. It's going to hit that, and it's going to hit that really fast. So it can pull that 7 amps. Why do you think it pulls that 7 amps really fast? It's higher fuel pressure, just like GDI. It takes more effort to get the injector open because there's more fuel sitting on top of that pintle. Once we get it open, we don't need this exact amount of energy to keep it open because eventually we're just going to close it. That's what you're going to see. Back here, what do we see back here?
Big pintle hump.
Big pintle hump. There you go, right? See? Got to have big pintle hump. If you don't have big pintle hump, not happening. Then it's the GDI waveform. We're going to hit about 65 volts, and then we're going to pull down, pulse width, and then we're going to switch over to 12 volts. Same thing. We're sitting about anywhere from 300 PSI to about 3,000 PSI on top of that fuel injector. We're using a special driver to step that voltage up to get it open. And we don't need that kind of voltage or current. That's going to pull about 10 amps. So this is an amperage waveform. So same thing, pull down, go up. Each one of these boxes in the red here is 100 millivolts. So 0, 100 millivolts equals an amp. So what are we roughly resistance-wise? About 12 ohms, right? 1 amp, 12 divided by 1 is 12. So we can tell a lot by this waveform. If we wanted to make this bigger, we would lower this voltage down to 50 millivolts, and now it would be 2 boxes. Now this here, you will see this same thing right here, halfway up the ramp, about 600 milliamps. That is the pintle hump opening. That is your true fuel value from the time that pintle hump opens to the time that it closes. This is how you measure work, right? We all have reviews at the end of the year. Hopefully you get more money. If you pay this fuel injector $12.60, that's not enough to know that it actually did work. You need to check the current. The current is going to tell you if it actually worked or not. Resistance, is it going to work? On a cold engine, you're going to read 12 ohms. Don't just go, oh, well, it didn't say OL. Because when it's hot, resistance changes. It's going to be bad. Always look at voltage and current. If you're going to pay it, make sure it's doing the work that you're paying it to do. This is using a 5-gas analyzer. So if you had a leaky fuel injector, let's face it, things leak. I have a 1-year-old at home. He leaks everywhere. Hopefully in 40 years, I'm going to leak and he gets to put my diaper on. But so if you don't have a 5-gas analyzer, but you can do this with a 5-gas analyzer. So you want to zero it out in the engine bay. If you had, 50 parts per million in the engine bay, you go down one spark plug hole, you have 150, 2, you have 150, 3, 100. You go to 4 and you have 3,000, you have a leaky fuel injector. I know you don't have a 5-gas analyzer, so here's a couple things. You're gonna have a borescope. Borescope, problem is, you have to make sure that your specifications for your borescope can deal with fuel and heat, because you can't do this on a hot motor if your camera isn't specs to heat. Because once the motor cools down, guess what that injector is not going to do anymore? Like that fuel vapor, what do you think that's going to do to your camera? It's going to fog the camera up if it's not built for it. So the best thing you can do is take a screwdriver with a long piece of rubber hose about 6 inches on it and just go down and wipe the bottom of the cylinder after you shut it off and pull it out. If it's wet, you have a leaky fuel injector. That's, if you don't have a 5-gas, that's the best way to do it. Everybody okay with that? So if you get that a hard start and it goes, could be a leaky injector. Could also be something else I'm going to cover later. So, back in the day, we had, you actually had the injector pulse tool, and it would pulse the injector. Still a really good way of doing it if you can do it. But now we're in, 2024. You can do this with IDS if you have a factory scan tool. I don't know if aftermarkets can do it. I do a lot of Ford work and I use IDS. So I couldn't tell you really. So what happens is there's a fuel rail pressure sensor on the fuel rail, right? So we can monitor the injector on time, and they can monitor the fuel rail, and they can tell you how much fuel flowed. So in between these triangles, these are called ticks. So if you're in between these ticks, you're okay. If you're low, you're not flowing enough fuel, and if you're over, you're flowing too much fuel. So this is the old school way of doing it. Remember the old school way of disable injector 1, disable injector 2? Was that a good test?
Slow test, but it worked.
Why did it work?
Well,
Why did it work?
if you pull an injector and the injector's bad, and you notice no difference in the way the engine's running.
Let's go back to theory earlier. Incomplete combustion. What did you do when you killed that injector?
Definitely incomplete combustion.
That's all you proved, was you had incomplete combustion. It didn't tell you if the injector was good. It didn't tell you if it was bad. It just told you that that had the least amount of RPM drop on it. It wasn't a good test. It was good for narrowing down a cylinder, but it didn't. Everyone thinks that tells you it's an injector. It doesn't tell you it's an injector. Everybody okay with that? But now, where we're at with lab scopes, now that same car with a fuel rail pressure sensor, we can do that same test that the IDS can do with a lab scope. So the red is AC coupled. So we're going above and below 0 volts. We're not looking at the 0 to 5 volts. We're using the blue as injector 1 here as our turn on. And we can count our firing order off 1, 3, 7, 2, 6, 5, 4, 8. Using that, see how 1 drops and then bounces back up? 3 drops, bounces back up. Look at 7. Down, up, down, up. 2 drops. 6, down, up, down, up. 5, down, up, down, up. 4, drop. Right? Have a problem with those injectors, right? Even if you didn't know anything, you can tell the odd man out. It's not a bank-to-bank issue on a Ford. Those are literally injectors. We replaced Pete Myers. Anyone know Pete Myers? He actually did this case study. We put all 8 injectors in. Would we not agree that they're all the same now? So this is where we're going with scopes. You don't need to own every scan tool. I'm cheap, but I know the limitations of my tools, and I know what they can do and what they can't do. But with lab scopes, your imagination is your creation, what you can do with it. So we're going to look at a Chevy here. 1, we're okay. 8, we're okay. 7, something's going on. 2, 6, 5, 4, we're okay. 3, and then we repeat. Would we agree with that? It's cylinder per cylinder, nothing's changing, but we have an odd out. We used the fuel system cleaner on here, and this isn't a plug. It was a really good fuel system cleaner. You're not going to do this with an off-the-shelf fuel cleaner. You can get them close, but you're never going to get them to clean up 100%. But we ran a fuel system cleaner through it. Would we not agree that they all got better?
Yeah.
1, 8, 7, 2. So the only difference on this Chevy is they don't have a fuel rail pressure sensor. Instead of using a fuel pressure gauge, we put a fuel pressure transducer in the fuel gauge. So using a fuel pressure transducer, we're able to see the fuel drop on the injectors. If you're not pressure transducing, this is just where it's going. So fuel delivery supply. On a good 4-cylinder engine, you need to have 0.4 gallons per minute. On a 6, 8, and 10, you need to have at least 5. On a 4-cylinder turbo, you need at least 5. And you can live by this number. I'm telling you, you can live by this number. This is a good number. Who does the, I have my pressure gauge hooked up, hit the button, the car didn't stall out? And everybody do that for their fuel volume test? They have the hose, they hit the button. That's not a good test. What is volume and pressure? Are they not directly opposite of each other? If I have a large volume area with no pressure, I have a large volume. If I squeeze it down, I have high pressure and I have low volume. When you hit the button, what are you doing? You're making more volume, right? You're increasing the volume area of that fuel line. Just like deadheading a pump isn't a really good test. I don't talk about fuel pressure because if I have a fuel pump, restriction, and injectors, don't I have pressure on both sides? So it doesn't do me any good. Volume is where you need to stay and you need to live. I found more problems that the fuel spec was right, plus or minus a PSI, and I did the volume test, and the volume always showed me I had a problem. You need to measure volume. These aren't around anymore, but this MAACA one is rebranded by MightyVac. MAACA doesn't sell it, but you can get it through MightyVac. You can also take off your gauge and put a pressure transducer in there if you wanted to. So this is an old software that it would tell you that if you had this size motor and all this stuff, you could put your calculations in and it would tell you what you should have. I'm telling you, you can live by these numbers. These are good numbers. Fuel alcohol testing. I know we all have the Gatorade bottle. We put the fuel in it and we see if the line moved. Go on Amazon, spend the $5 and charge your customer whatever your labor rate is, because you look foolish when you walk out to your customer with your Gatorade bottle and you're like, there it is. Sorry, I got my spit out of it, you know. Go on and spend the $5 and buy the bottle on Amazon. You know what I mean? But so what happens is you fill this up with fuel, water to this line, and then you fill the rest up with fuel and it'll give you your ethanol content. Just spend $5 and get the bottle. So current ramping. If you suspect you have a fuel problem before you get the gauge out, you need to go to a current ramp. So what we can do is by pulling the relay out and jumpering, what 2 pins on the relay are the load side? What 2 pins do we need to jump out? 30 and 87 we need to jump out. So you're going to put a fused fuse lamp in it, you're going to put your amp clamp, and you're going to zero it and put it on there. And then you're going to get a current waveform. So this is your typical current waveform. See how we're about 6 amps? 6 amps is a good number. Almost every fuel pump draws 6. That is doesn't have a fuel driver module or something in it, because we don't need to load at lower RPM, so we're not going to have this RPM or the current. But 6 amps is the number you need to look at. So what you could have is a restriction in the fuel supply, like a clog filter. It's going to take that current up, right? We have to work harder. We have to push that car to get it to move. So we have a restriction in the fuel line, we're going to draw more current. If we have a restriction at the pump, the inlet, or our gas tank is empty, we're going to draw less current because no fuel is going through the pump. The pump doesn't have to work as hard. Everybody okay with that? If you had worn pump brushes, you'd be up and down. You'd be all over the place. Up, down, up, down. Worn armature bushings, the same thing. They'd be all over the place. Worn or burnt commutator bars, well, if it even, you might have to hit it, tank, you know, that whole scenario. But same thing, it'd be all over the place. Restriction in the return line, fuel current's going to go up. It's a restriction. It's going to make it work harder. But you can live or die by this 6 amps. So this is a known good, and then this is a bad, and then we replace the fuel pump. See how this says every 100 millivolts is an amp? So we have 0, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, right about 5.5 amps. Our new one is 6 amps all the way across. Now you're thinking a half an amp's not an issue. I'm okay with that. I get that. But when you see this and it's consistent and you're one box lower, that fuel pump's on its way out. If you, whatever your diagnostic process led you to believing it's a fuel issue and you see that, your fuel pump's on its way out. Everybody, I always get this question asked about RPM. RPM's nice, but I'm going to tell you I don't really care about it because I can tell by the current. So on this scope here, you're going to count out 8 commutator bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we're going to start over. Each one of these are 2 milliseconds of division. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We'll call that 15. Take 1,000 divided by 15. You get 66.6 revolutions per second. You get 4,000 RPM. So the theory on this is if your current goes up and your RPM goes down, you have a problem outside, right? You can't spin the pump up to get RPM because it's restricted, and you have a force on it slowing the pump down. Now it goes the opposite way. If your current goes down and your RPM goes up, your problem's in the fuel tank side. This only works on a non-variable fuel pump, because a variable fuel pump is going to change the pulse width modulation and the speed of that pump. But what this could tell you is if you have that hard start, that you know, the 3 times, and on the 3rd time it starts, the problem is probably in your tank. The hose between the sock and the pump, either somebody replaced it and put the band clamp around it and it folded over and now the fuel's recycling, or there's a pinhole in that pump. That there is some use to it. But I'm telling you, if you go 1, 2, 3, that car's, the problem's in the tank. It's a return line valve, restriction, or you're out of gas or something. But it's a good way of telling you that. Everybody okay with that? I'm more worried about current and volume than I am about RPM. GDI fuel injectors. So GDI fuel injectors, when you take them out, they have to be coded. So if you think you're going to fix a misfire by swapping an injector to another injector, you have to code these. They all have a 6-digit number on those injectors, and you have to write that into the PCM because they're the mechanical tolerances of those injectors. When they manufactured the injectors, they knew that that injector flowed that amount of current, and the PCM needs to be updated to that. So if you're going to swap Gnostic it, you have to write the codes down. So you need to lay them in order. Also, there's special tools on these nylon O-rings. Don't just take a razor blade and cut them off. There's an actual tool that's like a half a U that goes in and cuts it. Don't take a razor blade, because what do these do? They seal the combustion chamber. They go directly into the combustion chamber. You put a scratch or something in that, you're going to get a combustion leak. You don't install these O-rings right, you're going to get a combustion leak. Also, you have a set amount of time when you use the tool. You're going to have one that's going to stretch it and then one that's going to shrink it. You only have a certain amount of time to get that in the cylinder once you shrink it. Don't just do them all on the bench and walk away for lunch. They're not going to go in. And you never want to put oil or anything on these. You got to put them in dry. Everybody okay with that? So looking at this Ford P01122 camshaft position, timing over advanced both banks, 2195, 02 bank 1, bank 2 lean. Let's look at some fuel trim here. This is, our freeze frame. We have -17, -17, 465 RPM. So mass airflow was 7.8 grams per second. So what are some things that this tells you? What does positive 17% tell you? I'm sorry, it's negative, yeah. It's -17. What are we doing? Fuel away. So are we justifying the code? Do we have a lean? Okay. Are we at idle? So now we know when to test the car, right? 496 RPM. They're stuck rich, but we're taking 17% fuel away. So that's where we get a -17 from. We know that we're at idle RPM, right? So now we know when the car's broke, we know what's broken, we're sort of justifying the code, right? You know codes are not part numbers, right? I want to make that very clear. Codes are not part numbers. You will not find a Dorman P0305. You will not find that. So we do a Ford power balance test using the Ford IDS. We can see 7's low, 6 is low, 5 is low, and 8 is low. What does that tell us? We have a one bank issue, right? So here's our timing. This is where we should, this is the left bank. Our dot lines up. We're almost 1 tooth off. Fuel trims can be very tricky on a timing, variable valve timing car. Because how do we tell fuel trims? Just think about it. How do we measure the air coming in the motor? We use the mass airflow. Does the mass airflow say, hey, this is only the air for the right bank? Or does it say this is only the air for the left bank? It says this is the air for the overall motor. So if we change timing on one and we're both reading 5 grams per second, this side is out of time. We're only flowing 2. This side's flowing 2.5. But what do? We fuel for both sides, right? So now we got a fuel trim correction. So just know that now it could be, it used to be when a timing chain jumped, the side that didn't have a fuel trim correction was okay. The other side was the side that was out. Now we have variable valve time. If we jump to an advanced position or we're stuck in a retard position, we could be less air or more air. So it's a little bit more complicated now. But we were able to find that timing was off between using our freeze frame data, our codes, and using some scan tool data using our power balance test. Ignition waveforms. Anyone doing primary ignition waveform testing? This is a really good way to diagnose a lot of things. Ignition waveforms can tell you a lot about a car, if it's a mechanical issue, if it's lean, or if it's rich. This is the one thing I believe that you really need to be doing if you're diagnosing cars. So what we have here is we have the firing line and then we have the burn line. I don't care about the firing line. Just know that you should know that your lab scope capabilities, most of them are 200 volts. You would need an attenuator to go over 200 volts because if you feed 400 volts into your lab scope, you're going to kill it. I only care about this line here. That line, as we get leaner and leaner, shrinks more and more. But that line, if I look at all 4 cylinders on a 4-cylinder engine and they all look the same and they're all pulling about 2 milliseconds, I don't have an issue. I think we can be okay with that, right? I don't like to say a number because then people get stuck on a number. But now, this is, if the line is shorter, it's harder to jump the gap. You used more energy to jump that gap, so the line gets shorter. If you have a worn out spark plug, the line gets shorter. It takes more energy. It can't fire as long. If it's rich, what is fuel? Fuel's a conductor. It's going to be longer. So it's a couple different things in the really simplest ignition waveform. If I'm rich, it's going to be longer and this pattern is going to slope down. If I'm lean, the pattern will be shorter and it's going to rise up real high because we're running out of electrons. So we're putting extra resistance in the cylinder. If we see this, this is some kind of blowout. Something's blowing the flame out. We have a mechanical fault. Everybody okay with that? If you need 3 things, those are the best 3 things you can look at for ignition. And I only say that because how many spark plugs are easy to get to anymore? It's easier to get to a PCM anymore than it is to get the spark plugs. So I'd rather do this at a PCM than I would try to get spark plugs around and play swap Gnostics. Everybody okay with that? If you don't want to buy a lap scope or you're not using a lap scope, this GTC 505 is an incredible tool. It is a secondary waveform. You literally, it's a wand. It'll walk up and it'll paint a pattern for you. See how we have an air gap here? We're firing. What do we not have here? See here, we have a gap. So even if you didn't know about anything, if I walked up, I said, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, nothing. Right? Where's my problem? If anything, at least that tool will tell you that that cylinder has a problem. This job does a really great tool. There's also another section where you can go in and it'll tell you, you can actually read your burn seconds. It'll say 2, this one's 3, 3, nothing happened, and then 4. But at least you know just by going over the cylinder, it'll tell you that the difference between the cylinders, you can play the odd man game out. This is a really great tool if you're not a lab scope user. Aluminum foil on your coil wires, let it arc, save your aluminum foil from your lunch, put it on a ground a spark plug and see if it jumps out. Maybe it's jumping out of the boot. If you see stuff like this is where you would see it. See this burning? If you ran around that aluminum foil, it would start jumping out there. If you look here on these coils, on these Toyotas, what people think this is dirt, this is actually the coil arcing through the coil. The spark plugs have gotten so worn, the secondary ignition cannot jump the gap anymore, that it's literally jumping out of the coil. So always make sure you take your test light around those and see if it actually arcs before you sell a tune-up. If you're going to look for an open spark plug wire, use baking soda in a bottle, ground your test light, negative test light, ground it, spray it with baking soda and look for the arc. Make sure you take your wedding band off because you're going to get it. But make sure you use baking soda, not salt. A lot of people think salt, but salt's corrosive, and now you got to get the salt off that engine. He's laughing. He knows. So let's look at a good, this is what we call a parade pattern. Yellow is one cylinder, red is another. I think we can all agree that yellow, we're okay, we fired, went down. This is almost what a rich would look like. See how it comes down? That would be a rich condition. See how the red didn't fire at all? We have a little bit of a voltage drop and a rise, but it didn't fire at all. This scope, this is another automotive test solutions tool. It'll actually do what a parade pattern is. You could grab all 8 cylinders if you had them and lay them on top of each other. And once again, even if you don't know about firing ignition patterns, you could rule the odd man out. You know, the old sun scopes and bear scopes, anybody that was way before my time, but the sun scope and the bear scope did the exact same thing. They did parade ignition pattern. So this is a good case study. So this is up at G Shop. It was a student of his. He had a student of his said, hey, after class one night, can I bring my car up? It's misfiring. I put all new coils and plugs in it. I still have this cylinder misfire. She's like, sure, whatever. So it's nighttime. He's like, let me just take a visual inspection. They popped the hood at nighttime, and this thing was literally flashing like a strobe light. See the difference in them? Sorry. It was literally flashing like a strobe light. So just always do a visual inspection. Probably, it was hard. I did ask him. He said it was hard to see during the day, but at night it was like plain as day. This thing was flashing. So cam crank correlations. I know I said a lot of people aren't using the scope, but this is where this gets really nice. You can start a waveform of cam and crank waveforms. And if you know what known good is, you can rule out bad. So you can start collecting these waveforms. Facebook has a waveform exchange you can go on. And these guys, unlike Bob, will actually say, hey, I have that waveform, and they'll give it to you. I know this is a Ford. This is the crank in the yellow, and the red is the cam. The red should line up with this. Anything to the right is retarded. Anything to the left is advanced. So even just getting on how hard is that on a Ford 5.4 liter to get to the cam and the crank sensor? I don't do relative compression if I don't have it in my scan tool. I don't have to do bring the piston up, look the harmonic bouncer. I don't have to pull the valve covers off. It's a lot easier with a lab scope to do that, right? You save it, print it, bill the customer. When you're done, keep the known good, give it to the customer. This was your before and your after. Crank sensors. So this is a 2-wire crank sensor. This car didn't set any DTCs. You got to understand, codes are only as good as the programmer that programmed them. Somebody wrote the software to code that car. So it said, I'm not open because I have a switching voltage of 0 to 5 volts or 2.5 volts. And I'm not shorted because I'm not at 0. And I'm not shorted the voltage because I'm not 5 volts. That's how they coded the car. So now you don't have a code, but now you have a car that doesn't crank. So you have +1 to -1 on this AC sensor. I think we can all agree there is some kind of signal there, right? You need to be at least 5 volts, 2.5 one way or the other. This is after we put the new sensor in. It just, the code was not coded right. They knew that we needed a sensor, but they didn't ever actually change the spec of it. Wrote a spec of what it should be. So when you're stuck on something, just think, how does the computer calculate this? And this is where you might want to go to that Motorcraft website or Rotunda and look up OBD2 information, and they'll tell you, hey, the crankshafts, it uses the PCM uses a analog to digital converter, and it digitizes it and blah, 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 and it does all this stuff, but it'll start to lead you down the rabbit hole like, oh, but if this was the way, maybe this is how it works. So this is where that information comes in. You always have to RTFI the information. Or if you have a known good waveform library, I could go to whatever this 2005 Mercedes-Benz and say, hey, that crank signal's not right. So once you start collecting your files, you can start to fix these cars. This is a Jeep that came in. So G was doing some work for Snap-on. He was working on the new Modus at the time. And this guy owned a shop. He bought a top-of-the-line Modus. And he was stuck on this Jeep. He put a motor in it. This is how G got the car. Flywheel, wiring harness, coils. There were PCMs in the car. So this guy just buys this scan tool from Snap-on, says, I can't fix this car out. Your guys told me if I bought this scanner and lab scope, I'm going to fix cars. So they call G, and G's like, well, let me talk, send it up. So G gets the car, and it's rot, 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 rot. Like, you know when a car's out of time, right? It's but, like, it just like, it flexes. It don't sound right. G knew right away. So he goes in, he's in the Snap-on, and he looks at the software, and he looks at cam crank sync. Says they're synced. Well, it got to be in time, right? It's synced. So then he was doing some work for OTC. He looks at the OTC scanner, says in sync. The sync pid's not even there. So he calls the guy up at OTC and says, hey, why does Snap-on have this and you don't? And the guy says, they're called PID holders. And G's like, what does that mean? He's like, it means eventually they're going to get that information. So they're putting a placeholder in there for it, but they don't have it yet. He said, go grab your DRB. G goes out, looks at his DRB, cam crank not in sync. Goes over, turns the dummy camshaft position sensor in the distributor, car fires right up. Guy comes down and says, pay me my money. Car gets fixed. So just know what you're dealing with. Have multiple tools. But how we found this was, after that, he figured out what was going on. So he used the cam crank waveform. So we see 4, 4, 4, 4. And see how this one lines up here and it lines up here? Well, that's not the way the pattern's supposed to be. It's supposed to line up in between the two cents. So he found it with a scope. So he didn't need the factory scan tool. He just needed a known good waveform. And I mean, this car was horrible. There were wires everywhere. They were shredded. It was so bad, G actually put tape, duct tape, just on the harness so he didn't have to touch it, just so it wouldn't move. So another thing we can do with the cam crank, this is a 3/6. Anybody do timing chains on a 3/6? Not fun. So they should not line up. See how these are lined up here? This is bank 1 cam and crank. Cam gears, this is bank 2. See how these don't line up? See how these line up? Anything to the right is retarded, anything to the advanced is left. See how they line up? So it's left, it's advanced. Probably a VVT issue or something on the intake. See how this stuff just gets easier as we put the pieces together? So obviously, at some point, we had a fuel trim issue. We had a timing code or a mechanical code. Maybe you've done a relative compression test and then we got here. So 1 test is good, 2 tests is better, 3 tests are great. And just keep backing up the data. So this is using a factory scan tool. How many people have had their butt kicked by this P0339? Well, so this cart caused a lot of people problems because they put new crank sensors in, it doesn't fix it. So what we do is called a cam crank relearn. So what happens is when you have this code, it'll say signal failure, you can have line noise, rotor breakage, or an ECM failure. What you need to do is you need to do a cam crank relearn. On a Honda, you have to go in and you have to clear it out of the scan tool, and then you have to go in and do a relearn. It says this command erases the crank pattern data stored in the ECM PCM. Use this command after replacing a misfire or replacing a CKP sensor pattern clear. Perform the crank pattern and write the new crank. That is not just if you replace the sensor. If you do a misfire, because doesn't a misfire change the crank? you have a mechanical issue, if you have a timing issue, if you disconnect the battery, you need to do a cam crank relearn. This is the #1 cause of P0300s because the PCM does not know where it's firing because nobody ever did the crank relearn. Also, if you have a misfire monitor, it will not run if you do not do this because it doesn't know where the #1 cylinder is. You know, the old school cars used to go 60 to 40 on a D-cell, it will learn. Well, now we're doing it with the scan tool. It'll walk you through. Everybody knows how to read a scan tool. It'll tell you to clear, wait 30 seconds, you'll blow through it, sensor relearned, it's completed, turn the ignition off, it's completed. Time to temperature. So, anybody ever realize how we set thermostat codes? Or slow rate? There's all kinds of thermostat codes now. So, yeah. So what they actually do is they actually time this stuff. If it's from the start of the engine, it knows that if it doesn't go, if it's less than 2 degrees per, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 0.2 degrees Fahrenheit per second, it's cold, the coolant from the radiator is able to move into the engine, thus the slow warm-up rate. You have a sealing proper or a thermostat leaking. If it's faster than that, the engine heats too quickly, it doesn't have enough coolant in it, or the engine overheats. But that's how they actually measure thermostat rationality, by watching how fast it takes to warm up. So another cool thing, he built this into a scan tool. So over here, always it'll say warming slow, warming fast, or normal. So it's going to take seconds and then temperature, and then it's going to read it out. And see how in a minute it hasn't changed? 189, 189. A good one over time is about 10 degrees per minute. 118, 126, 133. So if you have a monitor that's not setting, you might want to check your thermostat to make sure it's operating at the right time. You don't need this tool to do this. You could bring your engine coolant temperature sensor up and go times per second since the engine was running. You could do that. It's just another way that he put this in the scan tool that is just a really good, phenomenal tool, everything that's in here. Output controls. Anybody know what this thing is here? Go ahead, say it. No, you're all wrong. It's the most expensive fuse on the car. Anybody know how much current will burn one of these computers up? 1.2 amps for 6 milliseconds. How many milliseconds are in a second? 1,000. I can't look at my watch that fast. 6 milliseconds. What is your average fuel injector on time at idle? 3 to 5 milliseconds. What are they? 1 amp. See how we could burn out a PCM driver if we're shorted? Don't take much. Coils do it. Ford Escapes burn up the PCM. Do we see any heavy duty wiring in this? We see drivers, transistors, circuit board, but we don't see any heavy duty wiring. 1.2 amps for 6 milliseconds. Very important. If you have low resistance, what do you have? You have high amperage, right? So if that injector is supposed to be 12 to 15 ohms and it's only 6, and it's for more than 6 milliseconds, you're burning that driver up. So in the 80s, GM had a problem where they were replacing parts and wasn't fixing cars. So they came up with these boards starting with OBD1, OBD1, and they finally worked their way up to OBD2. It was almost a breakout box. You would plug this little tool in and it would go through and it would tell you what all the PIDs were, and you could hit it with a voltage and it would tell you the resistance on the circuit, thus knowing your current. Well, that'd be expensive to own every one of those tools. What you can do is you can use a power probe. I know a lot of computers get burnt up with the power probe, but you can use this wisely. Always, always, always consult the wiring diagram and make sure you do this before you replace a PCM. Because you know what happens? You order a PCM, doesn't fix it. So what do? Call the parts house, you get a second PCM. Doesn't work. Then third one, you're like, I'm not using that PCM, I'm gonna call a different part. I'm gonna get an OEM one now. It doesn't fix it. Something burned a PCM up, you need to go in and figure out what it is. So you need to disconnect the harness from the PCM. If it's ground side, you have to put your ground there to make sure that you ground it, because right here we're using a shift solenoid, which goes from ground and power from the PCM. So you're going to take your clamp, you're going to ground it, and you're going to put your amp clamp. Even if you're not using a lap scope, put your amp clamp on a meter, and then you're going to pulse that injector and see how much current it hits. If it's more than what number, am I worried about it? I just said it. 1.2 amps. I'm burning up something. 6 milliseconds. If you get to the injector part of this, don't hold the button. Because what's going to happen? A hydrostatic lock a motor. So just be careful with that. Maybe clear the fuel rail out if you're going to do this. But this is a good way. You could literally bring out your wiring diagram and go pin by pin and say, okay, VAP solenoid, closed solenoid, 1.2 amps, 1.8 amps, 3 amps, well, you found your problem. Or on the other hand, maybe you find something that is not in spec. Maybe it's the other way. Maybe it's drawing no current whatsoever. Maybe you have a computer driver code and it's not the computer driver, it's the actual solenoid itself. But I think you would have found it in the different diagnostics. Everybody okay with that? Never do this with the PCM plugged in, because you're guaranteed to buy a PCM. So this is indexing. Make sure that you always index when you pull your connector off. See which side you have power on, and then make sure you put power on that connector. So when you go to turn something on here, so here we have 12 volts on this pin on the left side, so that would be 12 volts on the left side of the pin here. Make sure when you put power and ground to it, you put it the right way. Injectors don't really matter because it's a magnetic field, but if you get to like a new Ford purge valve, anybody look at a new Ford purge valve, what's on the side of it? Look at one. There's a positive sign on it. You know what that positive sign is? There's a diode in there. You put it backwards, you're going to burn it up. So don't just put power and ground. You need to index these things and make sure that if it has a positive side on it, same way with GDI injectors. GDI injectors are directional. Sensor simulators are great. These are old school ones here. The eScope Pro 8 channel has this built into it. If you're not a lab scope user guy, it's a great scope. This thing is the cat's meow. I'm going to tell you, you can get this from AES Wave. It's not even made in this country. It's a Vitec SimPro. It will do your injector flow test for you. If you don't have an actual injector flow test, it'll do it. This will do like 6 different crank patterns. It'll say, I either want it to be a 60 with a missing tooth or 60 with a missing tooth. I need it to be 0 to 5 volts. Whatever crank sensor you need it to be, you can actually dial in on this thing and look at your scan tool to see if you have a crank sensor or not. This is an incredible tool. If you have a resistor box, GM evap test earlier, we're talking about once it got hot, you couldn't run the test anymore. Go into service information, see what 80 degrees is, put that resistance in there, and you can run that evap test. Or if you just want to sensor, maybe you have an engine coolant temp sensor or something, you just want to put a value in there to see if the code goes away. You can do that. Decade box, maybe you have noise. You're picking up noise in a sensor. You could actually dial in a capacitance until the problem goes away and then just go out and get that capacitor and put it in series. So these are just some great things to have in your toolbox. CAD efficiency, this tool does a really good job with it. You don't need this tool, but obviously your front stream and your back stream, your back O2 should never diver. It should never move up and down. If it does, you probably have a CAD efficiency issue. Always snap it. If it doesn't move, you probably have a lazy O2 or you're not in fuel trim control. That rear O2 should move on a snap. But this eScan, he does a calculation where he actually monitors the front and the rear, and he can actually tell you the efficiency of that catalytic converter. You've probably been doing it for years with your other scan tool. This is just worth $100X that you can print out and give it to your customer. The customer understands 50%, 73%. Makes it real easy on the eyes. See how 100% the rear O2, I don't care if it's low or high, it just doesn't need to switch. Everybody okay with that? Using infrared, this is a 420 and a 430. Both these cats should be glowing nice and like this. This one has a burnt outness, this one does. Gonna give you a tip on this. What are heat shields? Heat sinks, they're designed to heat. So heat shields might throw this off or distort it. So just be cautious when you're using this. It might not look the same. But this is a really good test if you have like a straight cat through. That's another good thing to print out and sell to your customer. So this is a cop car. It's a decatalyzed cop car. So it had a 420 code, 3.8. Long story short, so after 9/11, when Ground Zero was shut down, cop cars just ran all day long. They never shut them off. They never went home either. They actually bust the cops in and out of upstate New York. The cars just stayed running. They brought fuel trucks in to keep the cars running. So this car just idled all day long. Cars designed to idle all day long. They're not designed to idle all day long. So we used the E-scan, and we obviously confirmed what we thought. We had a CAT efficiency issue. We used mode 6. We went in and looked at our mode 6 data. Spec is supposed to be 1. The other nice thing about that E-scan is it colors it red if there's something wrong. 1.46. We definitely had a bad catalytic converter between the readings, and then our mode 6 told us that not did we fail by a little? No, we failed by a lot. If 1 is perfect, 0.5 is almost half of that. So then we had a positive 17% fuel trim on this car as well. Problem with these cars, who's made enough money on these GM motors? I'm sure everybody can pick out a problem on this motor. These PCVs went bad. This little rubber grommet back here in the valve cover got loose and caused a vacuum leak. The intake went bad, right? So not only did we have a bad cat, but we also had a 17% fuel trim. So that's what killed the cat. Something kills cats. True or false, do cats have a break-in period? Yes. Every catalytic converter has a break-in period. It is designed for the honeycomb inside, the substrate, has a soft material around the outside. It needs to heat up and cool down. If not, that honeycomb inside will actually turn. Ford, and if you don't believe me, you can go to the Ford website. On the OBD2 monitors, if you look at cat monitor in the non-volatile RAM, they turn the cat monitor off for the first 300 miles or 3 hours of its life at 1,000 degrees because it knows it has to break in. So if you use a factory cat or an O2 cat, I'm not getting into it, just make sure you follow the spec and that there is a break-in period, whether it's leave it idle for 10 minutes, then wide open throttle, let it cool down, but there is a break-in period. BMW had a problem where the cats were actually turning inside of themselves and you were getting false misfires because the mass airflow was reading less air coming into the motor, so it started cutting out cylinders thinking it was a mechanical problem. This stuff gets weird, man. It really does. So this is that cat. It was starting to break down at 1700 degrees. When NOx starts to form, you start to fill these honeycombs up. This is a misfire detection software. You can use this on a Pico. So when you get that P0300, this is really, really, I'm telling you, phenomenal. I don't push a lot of tools on people, but you need to be using a lap scope. The power of the lap scope is phenomenal. So this is a software that you don't need. You can do it with the lap scope. But this software, remember the old dollar bill trick? It would suck the dollar bill in if the car was misfiring? This has a pulse sensor in the exhaust, and this is the #1 sync. What do you think that is? Misfire, that's the dollar bill sucking in. So now if you knew your firing order, and this software would do it for you, you could tell you it had 2 cylinders, would be 1, 3, 5, it would tell you that cylinder 5 was misfiring just by looking at the exhaust pulse sensor. This is the automotive test solution software. This does a really good software. These are all misfires. These would be all the dollar bills sucking in every time. And then it gives you a misfire counter over here. So if you have a car that's not setting a misfire, this will tell you which cylinder is misfiring. If you have that P0300, this will tell you what cylinder is misfiring. If you put that you set that P0301 and you put every coil, injector, plug, compression test in it, and it's not 301, this is going to tell you what cylinder is misfiring. Everybody okay with that? This is just the power of the scope. So we have this GMC Sierra, it's bipolar, has a mass airflow code, lean bank 1 and bank 2. So once again, we're just using the eScan software. We have long-term fuel trim 32%, long-term 30%, short-term -15 and -14. Bipolar, ain't it? So we have a long add, long-term fuel trim add, and then we have a short-term subtraction. So we go through, I think we'd all agree, we're taking fuel away -30% all the way through. Look at our mass airflow. What does that tell us? But what about the volumetric efficiency? Our VE is low and we're adding fuel. If we have to add fuel, we probably read the right amount of air. But what is our mass airflow saying we did? Right? So we have a bad mass airflow sensor, right? We're adding fuel to the proper, we obviously have more air than what we said the mass airflow had. So here, just another blown up view. We're low all the way through, right? Didn't we say if we were back here, if we were rich all the way through, we have a sensor issue? So then we put a new mass airflow in. Well, why were we running rich? Still stuck on that. Fuel alcohol, 73% when we went in with the scan tool. Were we actually 73%? Let's get our tobacco Gatorade bottle out, right? So this is where this tool comes in handy. We fill it up to the water. We're really about 5% ethanol. Recalibrate the scan tool, 3%, I'm okay with that. So this truck was bipolar. Not only did we have a bad mass airflow, but we had a calculation of alcohol content, flex fuel. After we fixed the car and the alcohol trim reset itself, that's what we had. Everybody okay with that?
Is that actually a command cleared?
You can. So what happens is with this is older cars used to have sensors and they would actually be able to read them, but then they came out of calibration, so they didn't work. So now the new thing is long-term, short-term fuel trim. When you fill the car up over a certain amount of time, it'll adapt itself on fuel trim and it'll actually measure that ethanol content by adding so much fuel it knows that's where the ethanol content is after a fuel fill up. So we had this Honda Pilot, negative fuel trims. Sorry, and it's 8:30. I'm just gonna blow through this real fast, guys. You're doing a great job. So I just want to bring this up, looking at our map sensor on a Honda, 1.04. Is that a good map sensor reading or a bad map sensor reading? It's hard using voltage, I know. At idle.
Should be good, right?
Should be about 0.85. It's a little high. Yeah, 0.85 on a Honda is about what it should be. So then we go in with another scan tool. We have System 2 Rich Bank 2. We have an emission purge valve control. Our map sensor intake manifold is 11%. Our fuel, long-term fuel trim, we're taking fuel away. We go in with the eScan. We have 15% on one bank, 9% on the other bank. Do our fuel trim test. Obviously, we have a fuel trim correction at idle. Still thinking I may have a purge valve issue because we had a purge valve code. Remember here, see how we didn't set a pending code? We only had the 175 rich. See how we went to the generic side and we have a pending code for the 443? So now we're going to go into mode 6. Look at our EVAP. Negative test value, negative 7.6. Maximum is -1. Are we going to have a purge problem? Right? I still don't think that's my issue, but I know I'm going to have a purge issue. But if I never went under global OBD2, is this car not coming back next week after I fix it? See how important it is to go into that data. So we do our relative compression test, good or bad? Right? They're all even, all across, even. So this is our vacuum reading using a lab scope. 17.5, is that a good vacuum reading? Low should be 18 to 21, right? But we have a rich condition, so we go through this automotive test solutions. This is a software. It'll tell you even if you don't know about lab scope or pressure transducer, it'll tell you if it's green, intake camshaft's good, yellow, exhaust camshaft timing is advanced. Cylinder 1, 2, 3 in the back, 4, 5, 6 are in the front. This is the other bank. Intake is good, exhaust camshaft timing is advanced. So now we're going to go in here. This is our pressure transducer lab scope. Piston comes up, compresses. We don't fire the spark plug, we decompress. Our exhaust valve opens, atmospheric pressure, our exhaust valve closes, our intake valve opens, and we repeat the pattern. Somebody had a question earlier and I answered and I said I'll show them with the lab scope. What was your question? This here, if your intake valve didn't open, would be a real, the compression would be low. And when this came in, it would be a big U because the piston would be sucking down against the closed intake valve.
It was a 2-valve, 2 valves for the intake, 2 valves for the
Okay.
One wasn't open.
So what you would see there when you did that is if you looked at one cylinder, you're going to have a deeper vacuum pull, and the other cylinder you're not going to pull because the valve's not one of the valves. You know what I mean? You're not getting the same amount of airflow through that valve. We're going to show you that on the exhaust side. So see how our pocket difference here from our exhaust here is 3.29. If we're in a sealed cylinder, right, shouldn't we start and end at the same time? If I had a syringe and I went halfway in it and I put my finger, if I pulled back down and I released it, would go halfway. If I pushed back up and I pulled back, I could pull back down until I got halfway, right? Where I started is where I should finish. Are we doing that here? No, you should have no more than 2 PSI difference. Look at our vacuum line, 17 PSI, and this is exaggerated, this is blown in. This is the other cylinder. See how we're only at 2 PSI difference? And back here, we're at 3.29 difference. No more than 2 different PSI. So here is, we adjusted the valves. See how we're only at 2 PSI different now? See, now we're at 19 inches of vacuum. See, we're only at that 2 different PSI. That's what you would see on your motor, but you would see it on the intake side instead of the exhaust side. So we adjusted the valves on this car, got the fuel trim back in. Look at the vacuum before and after. We went from 17.5 to 18.5. 1 inch of vacuum fixed this fuel trim issue. Look at it before and after we adjusted the valves. 3.5 PSI, 2 PSI. Just by adjusting the valves. We drove it, fixed it, fixed the fuel trims. Any questions for anybody? Before you guys go, I just want to let you know we have a hands-on emissions class coming up in New York. We do everything, drivability, mechanical testing, lab scope, pressure transducers, everything that we went on, we do hands-on tonight. Up in New York, April 6th, anybody ever heard of the TST big event? This is an all-day event. Bernie Thompson, the guy that built that scan tool that we've been talking about, this is the only place that he'll be teaching all year. We're going to have Wayne Colonna come out, doing transmission and cracking the case with Sherwood Cook. All day long, 3 classes, over $10,000 giveaway, like scan tools, you name it. They give it away up there.
Great event.
Yeah, phenomenal event, lunch, and it's just great to network. But that's all I have. Thank you, guys.
Good job.
I know people don't want to ask questions. Sometimes they get shy. I'm going to hover for about 10 minutes. So if somebody wants to ask a question in private, I get that a lot. Just feel free to come up and ask a question then.
I got a question. Volumetric efficiency programs. Anybody using their favorite one? Anybody using a volumetric efficiency program? No? What's that?
Calculator with snap on.
Okay. If you want, little tip is you could go to OTC Tools. It's a program. It's not an app. OTC Tools, volumetric efficiency. Bookmark it, and you can. Sorry, you could bookmark it, and you have your volumetric efficiency right on your phone.
Yep.
I couldn't find an app on it anywhere in the App Store. Maybe there is one, but it's pretty simple. OTC Tools, volumetric efficiency.
ATG has one in the App Store.
ATG has one in the App Store. Okay, thanks, Matt. Thank you guys for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us again, Ron.
Call me with that Tesla. Thank you.